The airlock exhaled, and Yusef stepped into a world that did not breathe the way he did. Velkari Station, if station was even the right word for something grown rather than built, something that had secreted its own hull over 4 centuries the way coral secretes limestone, pressed around him in soft bioluminescent pulses. The light came not from fixtures but from the walls themselves, slow rhythms of pale violet and deep amber cycling through patterns that Yusef had spent 3 weeks on the transit ship trying to decode and had only partially managed. The patterns meant something. Everything on Velkari meant something. He just didn't know what yet. The atmosphere was breathable. The diplomatic committee had confirmed this 17 times, as if repetition would make it less alien. What they hadn't confirmed was the smell. Not unpleasant, not pleasant. Something that sat between those categories and refused to be categorized. Iron and rain and something organic he couldn't name, like the scent memory of a forest that no longer existed anywhere in human space. A Velkari approached him across the transit hall. He had studied the xenobiological briefings. He knew what he was seeing. But knowledge and experience are different countries, and he had just arrived in a foreign one. She, the diplomatic liaison, had assigned this pronoun as a working approximation, and admitted inadequacy, stood approximately 2 meters tall, her silhouette built for a world with 40% more gravity than Earth standard. 6 limbs, the lower 4 for locomotion, the upper 2 terminating in manipulator clusters that serve the function of hands without being hands. 7-fingered, jointless, capable of moving in any direction simultaneously. Her skin, integument, the briefings corrected, was the deep blue-black of deep ocean water, and beneath it, faintly visible through translucent patches near her joints, something moved. Fluid or light or both. Yusef didn't know yet. Her name was Velithari San, which translated approximately as the third daughter of the San line, who carries the light of the navigator caste. He was to call her Ithari. The approximately in that translation was doing significant labor. She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes, the Velkari had 6, arranged in a forward-facing cluster that gave them a visual field spanning nearly 200 degrees, did not blink. They refocused, each independently, a soft clicking sound accompanying the adjustment. He had read that this clicking was the Velkari equivalent of a frown. He was already being assessed and found confusing. "Human Yusef," she said. The translation implant processed her speech, not words exactly, but a layered combination of subsonic vibration, color shift in her integument and directed chemical release, and rendered it into something his auditory cortex could process. The result sounded like spoken language but arrived slightly wrong, the way a translated poem arrives wrong, technically accurate and experientially incomplete. "You have come far." "Very far," he agreed. He was a xenobiologist by training, a diplomatic attaché by circumstance, and presently the only human being within 11 light years. His role was observation. Watch, document, do not interfere. Report back. The treaty negotiation was above his clearance. He was the scientist in the corner taking notes. "I hope the journey was worth making." Her upper limbs shifted, a movement that might have been a shrug, or might have meant something entirely different. The light beneath her integument pulsed once, amber. He made a note. He did not know what amber meant yet. She led him through the station's corridors, which curved rather than cornered, which branched according to a logic he would spend weeks mapping before he understood it was organized by scent rather than direction. The Velkari navigated their own home, the way humans navigate familiar rooms in the dark, through a felt knowledge of where things were, a map carried in the body rather than the mind. He walked behind her and studied everything. This was what he did. This was what he was for. What he did not expect, what no briefing had prepared him for, was the moment she paused before a viewport that looked out into the deep of the nebula the Velkari called the breathing place, and said, without looking at him, "The light takes 11 years to reach us from the nearest of those stars. We are always seeing what was, not what is." He stopped walking. It was the kind of observation a scientist makes, an observer makes, someone who looks at the universe and notices the texture of it, the strange, sad beauty of the delay built into all perception. Yes, he said carefully, that's true. The light beneath her integument shifted. He would learn later that this was the color of what might translate, imperfectly, as recognition. The color you go when you realize you are not alone in a thought you thought was private. She had not expected him to understand. That was clear from the pause before she moved on. He filed it. He did not yet know what he was filing it under. Chapter 2. What Cannot Be Named. The Velkari did not have a concept of privacy that matched any human equivalent. This took Yusef 3 weeks to understand, and understanding it did not make it comfortable. The Velkari lived in a chemical conversation with each other that never entirely stopped. They were social organisms at the biological level. Their endocrine systems evolved to broadcast and receive emotional state continuously, the way certain trees broadcast stress hormones through a root network. To be Velkari was to be partially legible to every other Velkari in one's vicinity, all the time, without pause or option. His presence made them uncomfortable in a specific way he could now recognize. The scent they released around him was the olfactory equivalent of a question mark. He was illegible. His emotional broadcasts were the wrong frequency. He was silence in a room that was always speaking, and silence to the Velkari meant either death or danger. Ithari had been assigned to translate this silence into something her people could tolerate. She was good at it. What he had not anticipated was that she would come, over weeks of daily contact, to find his illegibility interesting rather than alarming. "You do not signal," she said one evening, or what passed for evening in a station without a sun, the bioluminescent cycling toward its longer, lower amber phase. They were in the observation chamber where she had first made her comment about starlight. He had begun coming here to work. She had begun appearing to observe him work. Neither of them had named this pattern. Signal, he did not look up from his documentation. "Your body, it does not tell me what you are feeling. My people find this disturbing." A pause. The kind she inserted when the translation was forcing her to approximate. "I find it interesting. There is a Velkari concept. I do not know if your language has a match. Vel-Sarath. It means the thing that exists in the space where communication should be, the silence between signals that still means something." He looked up. Outside the viewport, the nebula shifted, slow as weather. "We have something like that," he said. "We call it subtext." She was still for a moment, true stillness, not the restful stillness of a relaxed being, but the focused stillness of a predator calculating, of a mind working hard on something. Then, amber, the recognition color. "Subtext," she repeated, in her own layered voice vibration chemistry, trying the concept on. "The meaning beneath the meaning." "Yes. You are very full of subtext, human Yusef." He returned to his notes. His hand was not entirely steady. This was a problem, and he knew it was a problem, and the problem had a name he was not using. The diplomatic mission existed because humanity and the Velkari were negotiating coexistence in a contested region of space where both species had made claims. It was fragile. It was political. The liaison had been specific. He was an observer, a scientist. Attachment of any kind to the subjects of observation contaminated the data. This was known and documented, and Yusef had agreed to it. What was not in the briefing was Ithari crouching beside him in the biological survey of the station's lower levels, the living roots of the grown structure, where the Velkari cultivated their food organisms in warm salt water, and reaching into the tank to retrieve a damaged organism, holding it in her manipulator cluster with a gentleness that he recognized as deliberate, and examining it for 3 full minutes before returning it to the water alive. "Damaged ones are usually harvested," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "I prefer not to." He wrote, Subject demonstrates individual deviation from resource efficiency norm. Emotional response to individual organisms distinct from caste expectation. This may be significant. He did not write what else he was thinking. 3 days later, the crisis arrived in the form of a Velkari Council decision. The diplomatic talks were stalling. The human delegation had proposed a boundary division the Council found geometrically reasonable and culturally incoherent. The concept of dividing a nebula into sections and declaring half of it property was, to the Velkari, roughly equivalent to someone claiming ownership of a thought. The language of the proposal had no Velkari translation. Not because the translation was difficult, but because the category did not exist. The talks were suspended. Yusef was informed that he would likely be departing within the week. He was in the observation chamber when Ithari found him. She did not make the sound that meant greeting. She stood beside him and looked at the same stars he was looking at, and the light in her integument was a color he had not catalogued before. Something between the amber of recognition and the pale blue of grief, cycling between them without settling. "You knew this would fail," he said. "It was not a question." "I hoped it would not." Her manipulator cluster moved, a gesture he had learned to read as something between a shrug and an open hand. The Council sees boundary where there is flow. They are not wrong to see it. They are using the wrong instrument. Is there a right instrument? She was still for a long moment. Then, "You see things, human Yusef. You document them. You do not always understand them, but you look at them honestly. This is uncommon." Outside, a star they were both watching had died 11 years ago. The light hadn't arrived yet. "I think I understand more than I've written down," he said. The cycling light in her integument slowed, settled, amber. She reached out slowly, the way she had reached for the damaged organism in the cultivation tanks, and placed the tips of her manipulator cluster against the viewport, beside his hand, not touching but close enough that he could feel the warmth that radiated from her integument through the glass. He did not move his hand. This was the thing that could not be named. This was Vel-Sarath, the meaning in the silence where there should be signals. Chapter 3. The distance light must travel. He did not leave at the end of the week. The reason he gave his superiors was scientifically legitimate. He had identified a potential cultural bridge in the treaty deadlock, something in the way Ithari had described the Velkari relationship to the nebula that suggested an alternative framework for the boundary question, and he needed more time to document it properly. This was true. It was not the whole truth, but it was the part of the truth that had a report attached to it. What did not have a report? The way the station had begun to feel to him, like a place where he understood things. The way Ithari's approximated signals, color, chemistry, vibration, had begun to arrive less as translation and more as direct meaning, bypassing the implant, the way you stop hearing the accent of someone you have known long enough. The way he had started, without deciding to, leaving small things in the observation chamber before he left each night. A note written in human characters she couldn't read. A drawing of the nebula as he saw it from the human end of the spectrum. Small Vel-Sarath. Messages in the frequency she had taught him to see. She left things too. He did not know if she knew she was doing it. The council reconvened on the 42nd day of his stay, which was 6 weeks past his scheduled departure. He was present as an observer, seated at the back of the chamber in the human section, separated from the Velkari delegation by the physical distance that protocol required and the biological distance that their species had traveled to reach each other. The human ambassador presented the revised framework. Yusef had written the cultural section. It did not speak of boundaries as lines. It spoke of the nebula as a breathing thing, Vel-Sarath, a word he had, carefully, borrowed, and proposed that both species were already living in the space between its signals, and that what they were negotiating was not ownership but relationship. The council was still for a long time. Velkari stillness is the stillness of concentrated thought. It looks to human eyes like nothing is happening. What is actually happening is a great deal, at frequencies human senses cannot detect. Then the lead counselor's integument shifted, deep, sustained amber. Around the room, other counselors shifted with it, one by one, the way a color spreads through water. Recognition, yes, but the Velkari shade of recognition, he was learning, contained something more than the human version. It was not just "I see what you mean" asterisk. It was "you have told me something I already knew but could not say" asterisk. He found Ithari across the room. She was watching him. He could read her expression now, not perfectly, not completely, but enough. The same way he could read a familiar poem in a language he had taught himself, missing some nuance, but inside the meaning's house, not standing outside it. The talks did not conclude that day. They concluded 12 days later, in a document that used 3 Velkari concepts and 4 human ones to describe an arrangement neither species had a word for yet. The nebula was not divided. It was designated as shared, not property, but relationship, a thing both species were in rather than a thing either species owned. On his last night in the station, Yusef went to the observation chamber. Ithari was already there. He had not told her he was coming. She had not told him she would be. Neither of them had named, across 42 days and a treaty and the distance between two kinds of mind, what it was they did in this room and what it meant. She was looking at the stars. The light from the nearest of them was 11 years old. He stood beside her, not touching, close enough to feel the warmth that came through her integument in slow pulses, and looked at the same light she was looking at. "Where I come from," he said, "there is a tradition. When people leave, they say something true, something they have not said before." Her eyes refocused, 6 independent adjustments, the clicking sound he had come to hear as a particular kind of attention. "Tell me something true." He was a scientist. He had spent his adult life learning to describe things accurately. He had documentation protocols and reporting standards, and a career built on the discipline of observation without contamination. He had notes. He had 42 days of notes. "The treaty works," he said, "because I understood you, and I understood you because I stopped observing and started listening." He paused. Outside, the dead stars gave their ancient light, patient as geology. "I do not know what the word is in your language for what I want to say next." She was quiet for a moment, then Veli Tharsan. Soft, her own name but shifted in Velkari, the same sounds carry different meaning by context, by the chemistry underneath them, by what they follow. The same word meaning something different. It means the light that has traveled a long way to arrive. He understood. He reached out and placed his hand against the viewport. She placed the tips of her manipulator cluster beside it, not touching, the same as before. But this time she shifted, slowly, with the same careful deliberateness she had used in the cultivation tank with the damaged organism, until the tips of her fingers rested against his. The light in her integument was amber. Sustained still. Outside, 11 years of distance hung between them and the nearest star, and the light kept coming anyway because that is what light does. It travels the impossible distance. It arrives. It does not ask whether it will be understood. It simply crosses the dark and lands.